Hello viewers, you're welcome to our YouTube channel.
Alright guys, in today's episode we're going to be looking at the structure of the human heart. So as you can see right here, the heart is divided into 4 chambers. So this improvisation will help us and as well guide us to have a clear understanding of what the structure of the heart is all about. So let's take a look at it right now. So there are 4 chambers of the heart. So the 4 chambers of the heart are, we have what is called the right auricle, we have what is called the right, or you call it the right atrium, we have what is called the right ventricle, or so we have this side. Then we also have what is called the left atrium, as you can see here, and we have what is called the left ventricle. It must be known and clearly understood that the side you consider as the left side is actually your right hand side, and the side you consider the right hand side is actually your left hand side. Make sure you pay close attention to that. So when you have a clear understanding of this, that there are 4 chambers of the heart, and you've been able to understand that, then we can as well talk about what structure precisely divides the heart into 2 equal halves. That part is known as the septum. As you can see, the septum actually divides the heart into 2 equal halves. So now we need to understand one thing. That is this big artery that is present in this particular blood circulatory system, and there is the big vein that you have. So we have the aorta, which is actually a very, very mighty artery, as we can see, and it is one of the artery that we have to talk about today. Then I need you to understand one thing again. What is that thing that needs to be understood? And that is the fact that after knowing the various parts of this structure of the human heart, then you should understand that this right hand side of the heart always carries deoxygenated blood, while the left hand side of the heart always carry oxygenated blood. As we know, a blood is said to be oxygenated when it is rich in oxygen, and a blood is said to be deoxygenated when it is deficient or having a deficit of oxygen. So now let's look at something together. How does the blood enters into this right atrium? How does blood get here? And how does the blood from this right atrium, how does it get to the right ventricle here? How does it happen? So we look at something. There is something that brings the blood into this right atrium, and there is something that makes it possible for the blood to enter into this place. Now pay close attention. In between the right atrium and the right ventricle, there is a valve that is present, and that valve is known as the tricuspid valve. As you can see, it is located inside this place now, or somewhere around this area. It is called tricuspid valve because it has 3 flaps, and you should understand that fact now. So now, what is the function of this tricuspid valve? The function of the tricuspid valve is actually to prevent the backflow of blood when it enters back into the right auricle. So please pay close attention to that, and that is also very, very important. Now, if you proceed, you'll have to accept the fact that the tricuspid valve is only attached to the vein because arteries does not have valves. It must be clearly understood. Now, let's leave that area. Let's talk about how does the blood enter into this particular right atrium, and how does the blood from this right atrium enter into this place. The same thing is applicable to this left hand side of the heart. How does blood enter into the left atrium, and how does the blood from the left atrium get into the left ventricle? You can see in between the left atrium and the left ventricle, there is a valve that is present, and that valve is known as the bicuspid valve. As you can see, it is in between the left atrium and the left ventricle. So what is also the function of the bicuspid valve? The major function of the bicuspid valve is to prevent backflow of blood from the left ventricle into the left atrium. Now, how is it possible for blood to be pumped into the various chambers of the heart is as a result of what is known as the contraction and the relaxation of the cardiac muscles, because there are some muscles, they are the heart muscles, or you call them the cardiac muscles. When they contract and when they relaxes, they causes the pumping of blood around the whole part of the body, from one section of the heart to different section of the human body. So that's the thing that you have to understand. Now let's now understand something. The blood that gets into this right atrium, as you can see here, this right atrium is actually coming from what is known as the vena cava. So the vena cava is a very big vein. Now the vena cava is subdivided into two, though it is not showing in this diagram, but the vena cava is divided into two, like I said. One vena cava is known as the superior vena cava. So the superior vena cava is actually found collecting blood, deoxygenated blood, from the upper part of the human body, which is the head and the arm region. So it is bringing deoxygenated blood from that part of the heart into this right atrium. Now we also have what is known as inferior vena cava. The inferior vena cava is also bringing blood, which is deoxygenated blood, from the lower part of the body. That is your lower part of the body and your legs region. So it's bringing the oxygenated blood from that part into this particular right atrium. So the blood from the right atrium finds its way, when the heart contracts, into this particular place known as the right ventricle. Now, as the blood enters this right ventricle, there is going to be contraction again, and the blood is forced directly from this right ventricle directly into this place known as the pulmonary artery. This pulmonary artery, as you can see, is connected to the lungs. So now, the oxygenated blood that is coming from here will find its way into the pulmonary artery. But before it gets there, there is a valve that is present in between this pulmonary artery and this right ventricle. That valve is known as the Semilunar Valve. So this Semilunar Valve makes sure or prevents the backflow of blood from this pulmonary artery into the right ventricle. Remember, it is only deoxygenated blood that is being conveyed by the pulmonary artery to the lungs. Why is the pulmonary artery taking this deoxygenated blood to the lungs? So that the blood can be oxygenated. As we know, the lungs is more or less like a region for cellular respiration. So there is going to be addition of oxygen to the blood that is being conveyed down there. So the blood gets oxygenated as soon as it gets to the lungs. So now, after this, let's now move to the right, the left hand side of the human heart. Now we have what is known as the left atrium, we have what is known as the left ventricle. So how does the blood get to this left atrium? The blood gets to the left atrium from the pulmonary vein. Remember, all veins carries deoxygenated blood except pulmonary veins that carries oxygenated blood. So the pulmonary vein is also connected to the lungs. So blood is coming directly from the pulmonary veins and is being emptied, which is oxygenated blood, and it is being emptied into this left atrium. So the blood from this left atrium will move directly into this left ventricle. Now remember, in between the left atrium and the left ventricle, there is a valve that is present. That valve is known as the bicuspid valve. As you can see, the bicuspid valve is somewhere here. So what is the function of the bicuspid valve? It helps prevent blood that enters from the left atrium or auricle into the left ventricle from flowing back. It prevents the backflow of blood from here into this place. So when you understand that, this bicuspid valve is otherwise known as the mitral valve. So that is clearly explained there. Now the next thing is this. When the blood gets to this place, which is the oxygenated blood, where does it go from this left ventricle? The blood flows directly into this part known as the aorta, which is this largest artery that you have. So the aorta now will help to transport the blood to every other part of the human body. But before the blood gets to the aorta, there is a valve that is also present in between this left ventricle and this aorta. We used to call it aortic valve, but majorly you can still call it the semilunar valve for the purpose of this explanation. So the semilunar valve is also present here, and it prevents the backflow of blood from this aorta into this left ventricle. Remember, the heart is divided into 4 chambers, and which is actually, as mentioned, then we also have a particular structure that divides the heart into 2 equal halves. That structure is known as the septum. So when you have a clear understanding of this, then you should know that the left hand side of the heart, which is this side, is always carrying oxygenated blood, while the right hand side of the heart, which is this side, is always carrying deoxygenated blood. So with that, you can have a clear understanding of the fact that we have the contraction and the relaxation of the heart always leading to the pumping of blood from one section of the heart to the other. Have you ever wondered how does it happen, or what makes it possible for the heart to contract and relaxes? That is why we have what is known as the cardiac muscles, and the cardiac muscles are also known as the heart muscles. Now, they need to feed as well. They need to eat. So if they have to eat, what do we give them? That is why